Tonight, Israel rescues 4 hostages from Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they will not relent until all the hostages are home, the living and the dead. This was a moment Noa Argamani was reunited with her family after 9 months in captivity. Also ahead, Rishi Sunak refuses to take questions from journalists as the row over his early exit from D-Day rumbles on. The Red War has a day out at Wembley. Who is winning the Rugby League vote?
What do you make of it so far?
Not a clue. Stay well clear of it all.
To me, they should all get together and make the country better.
And the return of Count Binface from Space Warriors to Bucketheads will ask whether the UK has the world's most eccentric election. We're joined now by 2 eccentrics of our own, John Rentoul and Laura Dunn, with us for the next hour. It's Saturday, I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening and welcome to the Politics Hub. Well, Israel has brought home 4 hostages from Gaza in the biggest rescue operation since the beginning of the war. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said they'd acted with creativity and boldness and they will not relent until they have all the hostages back. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has accused Israeli forces of a bloody massacre. Israeli forces rescued the hostages under fire from 2 houses in al-Nuseirat, according to Hamas. At least 210 Palestinians were killed and 1 Israeli soldier. The hostages were taken to a hospital in Tel Aviv and reunited with their families. They've been named as Noa Argamani, who's 25, Almog Mirjan, who's 21, Andrei Kozlov, who's 27, and Shlomi Ziv, who's 40. This was a moment that Noa Argamani was reunited with her family after 9 months in captivity. She spoke on the phone with Israeli President Isaac Herzog after her rescue. And these were the pictures released by the IDF. They show the moment 3 of the hostages were taken out of Gaza in a helicopter. In a moment, we'll speak to our correspondent Mark Stone in Washington. But first, let's go to Alex Rossi in Jerusalem. Can you tell us a bit about the operation on the ground there today?
Well, the Israeli military say that this operation had been weeks in the planning. The IDF, the military that took part in it, underwent intensive training. It took place in daylight. Now, they went into an area of central Gaza. It was intelligence-based, we understand, some of that information coming from the United States, and they went to 2 separate homes where the hostages were being held. Noa Argamani was being held separately from the men. We understand that there were very intense firefighters, particularly around the house where the men were being held, before they managed to get them out. And we saw those pictures, of course, of them being guided, running towards the helicopter before it takes off and leaves the Gaza Strip. Now, the information coming out of Gaza is that civilians on the ground have paid a very heavy price for this rescue operation. Hundreds have been injured and killed in the ensuing firefight. But certainly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will see this as vindication for the strategy that he's been pursuing in prosecuting this war in Gaza.
Alex Rossi there in Jerusalem. Well, I think we can speak now to Mark Stone, who's in the US. Can you tell us a bit about the diplomatic side of things? Because the US, of course, have been pushing Hamas to accept a deal, haven't they?
Yes, but they've also been saying that Israel should do what it can, however it can, to get hostages out. And to that end, the White House, both from President Biden, who's in Paris at the moment and did speak briefly about it, but also Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, have said that they are calling it a successful operation. They welcome the rescue of these 4 hostages. And neither President Biden nor his National Security Advisor have addressed the fact that so many Palestinians appear to have died. I was speaking this morning to a senior IDF source who was not denying that the that a significant number of Palestinians did die as a consequence of this operation. The Gazan Health Ministry, Hamas affiliated, of course, is saying the number is over 200. We cannot verify that. What we can not dispute is the pictures, and I have seen the most horrific images of the scenes that we have verified are around the area where those 4 hostages were being held. There are dead children all over the place, dead women, dead men as well. It appears to be a market area. Now, I put this to the Israeli Defense Forces, and they said, look, this was a civilian area where Hamas had chosen to hold Israeli captives, and that the people died, and they wouldn't say how many of them were civilian, how many of them were Hamas affiliated. They died as a consequence of crossfire from the Israelis going in and then extracting the hostages out. So this is today has really been a story of or a day of 2 very, very different sets of emotions. In Israel, jubilation, clearly, for 4 families and so many more as 4 hostages were released. But in Gaza, probably among the worst single days in terms of death toll of the number of people killed in a single incident, an incident which got hostages out, but which will make the peace process, if you could ever call it that, the prospect of a ceasefire, all the more difficult. Remember, what is it? It's Saturday today. It was only Friday last week, the Friday before last, that President Biden was there in the White House claiming that he had somehow found a silver bullet, a deal that both sides he thought would agree to. The Israelis said apparently they had already agreed to it. Hamas had to agree to it. Well, where are we now? Just over a week on, both Israel and Hamas have said the deal that Biden presented, it has holes in it and on the ground, an awful, awful situation. But 4 hostages are now at home with their families.
OK, Mark, thank you so much speaking to us there from Washington, and Alex Rossi in Jerusalem. Well, in November, my colleague Sophie Ridge spoke to Orit Mir, the mother of Almog Mir Jan. This is what she told us about what Almog is like.
My son Almog is 21 years old. You see, he smile. He smile all the time. He take life easy. He's a very, very happy guy with lots of energy, full of values, sensitive. And he's friendly. He has lots of friends.
Well, this afternoon she spoke of her joy at his return and also called for the release of the remaining hostages.
Thank you for bringing my son to me, to us. I'm so excited that I could hug him today. There are still 120 hostages in Gaza, and we want a deal now. We want them to come back home as soon as possible.
Well, let's get some reaction to that from Alex Rossi, who we'll bring back in. And I guess also, what does all of this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu, Alex?
Well, there has been very little good news coming out of Gaza as far as Israel is concerned. Certainly for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he is under, Ali, enormous pressure both internationally but also domestically as well for the way that this war has gone forward. He will see, of course, that the way that he's prosecuted this is having some success. His plan really has been to keep the military pressure up on Hamas, as well as the negotiations, and try and get the hostages back that way. His argument being is that the language that Hamas understand is really a language of force. And he will say to people around the country, also internationally, look, we've managed to get 4 of the hostages back. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. I've been speaking to spokespeople within the hostage forum today, and they echo those sentiments we've just heard there. The chance of another daring mission like this one is going to be extraordinarily slim. The way to get the 120 hostages back, and of course some of those hostages are no longer alive, will be through a political process, some kind of deal. But as Mark was saying there in Washington, with the kind of bloodshed that we're seeing in Gaza at the moment, the chance of reaching that ceasefire, as has been put forward by President Biden and other leaders around the world, that becomes more and more remote. Now, domestically, Benny Gantz, an opposition leader who's part of the war cabinet, he was tonight going to hold a press conference, and it was assumed that he would be resigning from the war cabinet, which would steep even more pressure on Netanyahu. Interestingly, he has postponed that press conference, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is urging him, in light of what we've heard and seen today, not to leave, but to remain united.
OK, thanks so much, Alex Rossi there with the latest from Jerusalem. Well, Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen is with me. You've been keeping across the reaction here, and we've just heard from Rishi Sunak, I believe.
Yes, the Prime Minister has just tweeted in the last couple of minutes saying it's a huge relief to see hostages returned after their unimaginable ordeal, and heartwarming to see the pictures of them reunited with their families. He continues, we will continue to strive towards an end to the fighting, as well as safety and security for all. So he's just tweeted that about 5 hours after it happened. There's a lot going on in the Conservative Party at the moment. But David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, of course, talked earlier today about it being a glimmer in the darkness.
Thanks so much, Tamara, there with the latest from the Prime Minister. Well, let's get back to the election campaign then, shall we? The Prime Minister is trying to move on here from the anger over his decision to leave D-Day early today. He refused to speak to journalists in Yorkshire today. Last night, though, a Cabinet Minister speaking on live TV told the country his decision was very wrong. But at least Penny Mordaunt was out defending the party, and that got me thinking, where is everyone? The architects of the last 5 years, Boris Johnson, long-time Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, Sajid Javid, Liz Truss, even Michael Gove, the big names and recognisable faces of the 2019 victory and what's happened since, have all, for one reason or another, deserted the field. None, apart from Liz Truss, are even standing at the election. Boris Johnson today criticised Keir Starmer in the Mail, but not once did he tell people to vote Conservative. Rishi Sunak may not think the help of any of these characters is useful, but right now, as he battles the biggest upset of his campaign yet, the Prime Minister strikes me as a pretty lonely figure. Well, Rob Powell's been on the campaign trail today and sent this report.
A Prime Minister lying low and trying to dampen down anger over his departure from D-Day events. Rishi Sunak came to County Durham after one of his ministers said his decision to leave France early had been completely wrong. With planned questions from journalists cancelled, it was left to an ally to say whether Penny Mordaunt was right.
He apologised both to the country and also to those veterans, and I completely agree with what he said.
Do you agree with what Penny Mordaunt said, that he was completely wrong?
I agree with what the Prime Minister said. He said it was a mistake.
Once dominated by mining families, Labour politics should hang in the air in Bishop Auckland. It went Tory for the first time in 2019, but after scandal and instability, this latest mishap may leave its mark.
I'm an ex-serviceman myself, so it's a no-no, really. You know, you should have known better.
It just didn't seem fair to the people and to us or to all the veterans that had given their lives for that day.
You think it will affect how people vote?
I think it will.
Taking a swing at the Prime Minister too, the Liberal Democrats have called for the Tories to make amends by giving away money received from controversial donor Frank Hester.
I think the Conservative Party should give £5 million of that donation to a veterans charity. I think if they did that, then people might be able to draw a line. But it's such a letdown for a whole country, our history, and particularly our brave veterans, that I think they've got to do more.
Back on the Conservative campaign, the press and public kept at a safe distance.
After Rishi Sunak's worst day of the campaign so far, the Tories will be keen to move the conversation on with more policy announcements. There are strong hints at a further package of tax cuts, and I understand that an announcement around stamp duty for first-time buyers will be part of the manifesto.
There's also a Tory attempt to box in Sir Keir Starmer by repealing so-called anti-car policies in Labour-run Wales and London. The opposition making cautious noises on tax, though, a Labour leader not wanting success to go to his head.
Everything in our manifesto won't be any surprises on tax. All of our plans fully costed, fully funded, and none of them involving tax rises over and above those that we've already set out.
Just quick reactions, to be honest.
Wise words for a Prime Minister who can't let any more errors slip through.
Right, ready?
Rob Powell, Sky News in County Durham.
One-child win so far.
Well, we can speak now to the Business Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, who joins us live. Thanks so much for coming on the show this evening. First, I must ask you about the news that the 4 hostages have been rescued. Your reaction to that?
Well, it's great news, and it must be wonderful for those families. And yeah, our thoughts with them. I mean, I think it is clearly incumbent on Israel to make sure they act proportionately, but also it is deeply cynical when Hamas embed these hostages right in the middle of civilian populations. So very difficult circumstances. We all urge both sides to get together and try and strike this ceasefire deal.
And of course, the civilian death toll in Gaza continues. Your reaction to that today, because it seems like that number is rising and rising.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to see Israel do more to prevent civilian casualties. But as I say, it's very, very difficult when Hamas cynically embed these hostages amidst civilian populations. So it's very, very difficult. I understand the need from Israel's perspective to release those hostages, and it's great that they have done that today. But it's very difficult to do that without endangering civilian populations in Gaza, and that's due to, let's say, Hamas's actions and decisions where to put those hostages.
Let's talk about British politics now. And I hope you don't take this too personally, but it does. We obviously love having you on the show, but it does feel like some of the kind of biggest hitters from the last 5 years, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Sajid Javid, it feels like everyone's kind of abandoned the field. Do you think that's a fair point?
Well, I'm not offended at all, and I'm very keen to be on always on your show. And we've got some fantastic people, and this comes to everybody. Time in politics comes to an end, and they've got their own decisions to make and other things to do with their lives. But I think the 70 odd of us have decided not to stand again. I'm standing again, delighted to do so, and the vast majority of my colleagues think exactly the same. And we're right behind Rishi Sunak, and we think he'd be the best person to lead this country. And he's demonstrated fantastic leadership over the last 18 months, and we want that to continue.
Why do so many of your colleagues not think that, though? Why are so many MPs standing down, do you think?
Well, as I say, people have different things. Politics isn't the only thing you can do with your life. And Michael Gove, for example, I think he's been in politics for 20-odd years, and many other people who have stepped down have served their time too. So everybody, for all political careers, end, of course. And but there are some fantastic people coming through, and we've got a fantastic leader in Rishi Sunak, and I support him. I think he is the right person to lead this country. I think he's led us through a difficult time. 18 months ago, you see where this country was. 11% inflation, 11.1%. The country facing a deep recession. Both those things have been turned around, and that's because of the straightforward, clear leadership we've seen from Rishi Sunak. He's demonstrated his ability to get things done in the previous context in terms of the COVID crisis, cost of living crisis, where he helped businesses and households through those difficult times. He's very clear thinking. He's got a clear plan. The alternative is not clear, very unclear, in fact, and most of Keir Starmer's plans never see the light of day, and when they do, they don't last very long in the harsh light of scrutiny.
You talk about clear leadership. He's come under a huge amount of criticism for not showing leadership by missing the end of the D-Day anniversary. Your colleague Penny Mordaunt said it was very wrong. Do you agree with her?
He made a mistake, and he was, of course, in the UK commemorations in the UK and in the British commemorations in France. He said it was a misjudgment not to stay there for the international commemoration, and he's apologised for that. I've got to say, in terms of the things that are important to people on the doorstep, I've been out all day in Filey, in my constituency, knocking on doors, only one person of we must have knocked on probably 1,000 doors today, myself and my volunteers, mentioned D-Day. Most people mentioned what's really important to them, local issues or things like the NHS or immigration. Those are things people are really talking about. But so I think perhaps some politicians and some elements of the media are really trying to just keep the story going, which I think is now probably had its time and the apology has been made. I think it's time now to talk about other issues.
OK, you talk about politicians and members of the media. There have also been veterans that have been quite critical of what happened.
Yeah.
But let's move on. I want to ask you about you, Les. Is the Conservative Party the kind of anti-environment party at the moment?
Not at all. But we want to make sure that things are done that are appropriate, and we want to make sure that the costs of moving towards a decarbonised environment and a cleaner environment are sensible and are proportionate. And I think many people can see these ULEZ zones are disproportionate and hit certain parts of our population very hard, particularly those on lower incomes. So we've made the decision to reverse the Mayor of London's expansion of ULEZ zone. We expanded that, of course, into areas where people didn't even have a vote of which was the right person to be Mayor of London. So we think it's the right thing to do to make sure there are checks and balances, particularly when democracy is involved. So we think it's right that we reverse the decision to extend ULEZ.
OK, Kevin Hollingbrake, always good to have you on the show. I hope you come on again. Thank you very much. Right, let's bring in our panel for the evening, shall we? John Rentoul and Laura Dunn, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk first just a bit about D-Day. Do you think this is going to stick for the Prime Minister, John?
Yeah, no, I was very surprised to hear Kevin Hollingbrake say that it hadn't come up on the doorstep. I mean, maybe people are just too polite to say what they really feel, but I think we can already see that it's feeding through in opinion polls. I think there's a huge cut through. I think people feel very strongly about it.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with John on that. I mean, I've heard from people who've been out canvassing and candidates that they, not happy with what's happened, and perhaps it suggests a lack of political judgment. So it is cutting through, unfortunately, on the doorstep. Especially people are seeing it this weekend.
Yeah, and I guess time will tell if it really does cut through into the polls. We'll come back to you in just a moment. You are watching the Politics Hub coming up. As if it couldn't get much worse for Rishi Sunak, Count Binface is now standing against the Prime Minister. So we're talking the great British tradition of election eccentrics later in the programme. And after the break, Labour leader Keir Starmer has been pulling pints and pitching to overhaul the business rate system. But do the party's plans add up? We hear from a shadow Treasury Minister.
This isn't the first time China has landed on the moon. It's several times, and it's not the first time that China's brought samples back from the moon. This is actually the second time, but it's the first time that anyone has ever taken samples from the far side of the moon. The moon is tidally locked to the Earth, so the same side pretty much always faces Earth, and the other side we pretty much never see. And this is really challenging, even to land on the far side of the moon, because unlike on the near side, we don't have direct line of sight for relaying communications. So you have to put a satellite in orbit around the moon and bounce signals off that to the lander in order to even communicate to it. Now, China's gone to the South Pole region, specifically a permanently shadowed impact crater, so something that's caused by a huge impact. And this region is significant because potentially this is where humans will settle on the moon in the future, because the permanently shadowed crater regions are where we believe water ice exists. And so if water ice exists, potentially water also exists, which we know is required for sustaining life. And so the samples that this ascender brings back to Earth will tell us if there is water ice in the lunar soil, and if this is a suitable place for humans. It's also a suitable place for humans because there's permanently sunny regions where we could generate power for human colonization in the future. So it is a prime site for even Artemis mission, NASA's Artemis human missions that they plan to send in the few coming years.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by Labour's James Murray, the Shadow Treasury Minister. Thanks so much for coming on the programme this evening. First, let's talk about what's happening in Gaza, your reaction to the news this evening that 4 hostages have been rescued.
Well, we've long said that we want all the hostages to be released as part of an immediate ceasefire, which would also be used to get much needed aid into Gaza. We know the situation in Gaza is horrific. We know that tens of thousands of innocent civilians have been killed. So we need an end to this war, which involves an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and that aid getting in urgently that is so desperately needed.
OK, thanks so much. Let's talk a bit about domestic politics now, because you want to talk about business rates. You want to overhaul the business rate system, but what would you replace business rates with then?
Yeah, that's right. So we want to replace the current system of business rates with a new system that rebalances the burden away from high streets and makes sure that online giants pay their fair share. Because at the moment, we know that high streets are important not just for economic growth, but also as part of the social fabric of our communities. People want high streets to thrive. People want cafes, small shops, small businesses, pubs in our local neighbourhoods to do well. But at the moment, they pay a disproportionate amount of tax through business rates. So we want to rebalance the system to create a level playing field to give those small businesses a bit of an extra support to make sure that they really can succeed and play the role that we all want them to in our local areas.
So you basically mean an Amazon tax, a tax on online businesses?
Well, Amazon's a good example. That's the one people quite often give when you think about online giants. And if you compare, the way that you might buy, a book or another item through Amazon, you obviously buy that online. But if you're going into a high street shop, that shop is paying far more tax in terms of business rates because they're paying for their bricks and mortar premises. And what we want to do is rebalance the system to make sure that those high street shops, those high street businesses get extra support, get extra help from the government to make sure that they can succeed. And the way we give that extra help is by rebalancing the system of business rates to shift the burden away from high streets toward the online giants, helping those high street businesses to thrive.
Haven't you tried this before? Last year, you reportedly abandoned plans for £3 billion of tax on tech companies like Amazon, but you rode back because of fears over a trade war with the US?
Well, I think what you're talking about was a very time-limited response that we set out to give businesses support. That was a time-limited response, a sort of post-COVID in terms of the policy we set out there. The policy that we're setting out now is within the envelope of business rates. It's a business rates property-based taxation. This is not talking about any separate taxes, and it's revenue neutral. But this is about rebalancing the burden within a business rate system by replacing the current system of business rates with a fairer system that supports high street businesses.
OK, I want to ask you about an article that Boris Johnson has written in the Mail. He says that Keir Starmer wants to change the relationship fundamentally with the European Union. Would you take this opportunity to kind of clear that up? Can you rule out that Labour government would pay into the EU budget?
Well, look, we've been absolutely clear about our red lines when we're talking about the EU. There is obviously Brexit is done. We now need to make it work. And that's the situation that we face. We've said we are not going to rejoin the single market, the customs union. We're not going to have freedom of movement again. We're very clear what our red lines are when it comes to the relationship with the EU. But within those red lines, we think there are things that are within our national interest to improve, whether that's reducing frictions when it comes to trade, whether that's mutual recognition of qualifications. There are areas where we need to reduce frictions to improve our economy by strengthening our relationship with the EU when it's in our national interest. And that's what we want to set out to do. And actually, a lot of this is achieved through hard graft. It's rolling up your sleeves, working out what deals we can get to improve our economy, improve trade. It's in our national interest to do so, and that's what we would do if we won government.
OK, James Murray, thanks so much for joining us on The Hub this evening.
Thank you.
Tamara is back with us. It feels like next week is going to be a big week. Obviously, we've got the manifestos being launched. Can the Conservatives come back from what's been a pretty terrible week for them?
Well, I think that's the big question. Can they dig themselves out of the quagmire now? We've had this D-Day debacle and the huge backlash to it. The Conservatives really still reeling from that. You've got the newspapers full of cabinet ministers despondent about their prospects. You've got Conservatives talking about the real possibility that their other big problem, Nigel Farage's return, could Reform even achieve crossover in the polls and push the Conservatives into third place there. I think there's a lot of deep despair in the Conservative ranks. Rishi Sunak refusing to speak to journalists today. And just look again at the seats that they're visiting. The Prime Minister in Bishop Auckland, where the Conservatives have an 8,000 majority and his own constituency, whereas Labour today, I was with Rachel Reeves in Aldershot, a seat the Conservatives have held for 100 years and where they have a majority of 17,000. If Labour don't think that's a no-go area, then surely there aren't very many of them. And yet next week we've got the manifestos. Is that a moment for Rishi Sunak to regain a bit of momentum? We've also got more debates, including our election event. The Tories are chucking out a lot of ideas here on stamp duty today and among others, but it's Labour who are being very cautious, who are getting more of a hearing from voters at the moment.
And perhaps their manifesto will be a smaller target for the Conservatives. Thanks so much, Tamara. We will be coming to our panel next. Also coming up on the Politics Hub, as Count Binface announces he's standing against Rishi Sunak, we're looking at the peculiarly British tradition of election eccentrics.
They're not strong enough to play rugby league.
Are they strong enough to lead the country?
Absolutely not.
We hear from Rugby League fans on the election. Welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub. The top stories this evening. Israel has recovered 4 hostages from Gaza in the biggest rescue operation since the beginning of the war. According to Hamas, at least 210 Palestinians were killed in the operation. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said they would not relent until all the hostages are home. Rishi Sunak tries to move on from the D-Day controversy around announcing a stamp duty cut, but he refused to speak to journalists on the campaign trail today. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in our election campaign on the Digital Politics Hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Among the other stories we've been covering that you can read about today, all that and much more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Well, the polls are stubbornly refusing to move for the Conservatives. Sky's latest average poll tracker shows Labour on 43.6%, while the Conservatives trail on 22.8%, a commanding lead. And despite Rishi Sunak appealing to the right of his core vote with policies on immigration and national service, Nigel Farage's Reform Party are nipping at the Tory heels. One YouGov poll this week showing the party on 17%, just 2 points behind the Conservatives on 19%. Let's speak to Lord Hayward, the psephologist, who joins us now. First, though, we'll talk about the polls in just a moment. But I want to talk to you about the hostages that have been rescued today, because this is the sort of thing that you have been involved in, not this particularly, but tell us a bit about your role.
Yeah, in 1990, a friend of mine was a hostage in Kuwait when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And I set up and ran for 6 months the Gulf Support Group for relatives and friends of the hostages. So I understand the agonies that the families went through, because we had a call centre with people ringing in on a daily basis or regular basis. And then the joy and the emotion of those people coming home.
How did you feel when you saw those images today?
It took me back to 1990. The worst time really in 1990 was when the women and children came home. They were the first hostages to be released. But of course, many of the women had left their husbands behind, and they never knew whether they'd ever see their husbands again. And that was traumatic beyond belief. But it was so reliving experiences of 34 years ago.
Yeah, and of course, you know, you can see the kind of raw emotion, obviously, from the families there today. And I think you've got your OBE you can show us.
My medal here. I was awarded. I was lucky enough, along with the other organisers of the group, to actually be given an OBE. And I actually feel that in some ways it's the hostages and their families who deserved the medal rather than myself. I set it up, yes, but and in fact, I was actually told by the security services to beware that I was a target for the Iraqi organisations over here. So I had to beware about my own security. But as I say, I didn't go through anything in comparison with what the hostages went through and the hostages' families. So I can see and know from previous experience what it's like.
Really important work you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk now about British politics. The polls, to me, look very stubborn, still an enormous Labour lead. Is that simplifying everything?
No, it's not. The Conservatives have been flatlining. The Labour Party have been somewhere in the 40s for most of the last few months. I think the polls are somewhat overestimating the Labour lead, but it's still solid and still very substantial indeed.
That's interesting. Why do you think they're overestimating the Labour lead?
I did an analysis in 1992, which gave rise to the term shy Tories. And I've been looking at the same sorts of things this time around. Because every week there are local government by-elections, for example, and you can see how people are voting in comparison with the local elections in 2023 or 2022 and compare the results. And the Conservatives are generally doing, there were 5 by-elections this last week. So you can look at it and you just think it's not as bad, but there is still a very substantial Labour lead.
And what about reform? How dangerous is that for the Conservatives and for the Labour Party, perhaps?
It's dangerous for all the political parties. It's obviously dangerous for the Conservatives because there is a risk in some polls that there might be an overtaking by reform. I think that, again, is probably a somewhat overestimate, but the fact that they're close is a clear problem. But what's interesting is that reform and the other, what I describe as disruptor parties, the Greens, the Muslim campaigns and the like, are taking away votes from the major parties because, to be honest, many voters out there are thinking I don't have a cause. It's voters without a cause, and lots of them are considering whether they may just plain abstain.
So turnout could be quite low.
It could be low. There's predictions in some polls this weekend that say that turnout is going to be the lowest ever in a general election, and that it will hit all parties, not just the Conservatives. And this is what people have to be aware of when looking at these things, because voter loyalty is very, very shallow at the moment.
And I should say that you are a Conservative. Do you think your party still has a chance in this election?
I think the chances of actually achieving a majority are pretty difficult to believe. I was casting my mind back about bad election campaign events, and the two most recent ones. One was Gordon Brown accusing a woman in Rochdale of being a bigot.
We all remember that, yeah?
Absolutely, and yet it had no effect on the campaign whatsoever. If one looks, the Labour Party won Rochdale, and the other one was Theresa May and the launch of the Conservative Manifesto, which was an absolute disaster. And there were all sorts of rowing back in the next 2 or 3 days. And so it's, I'm here as an analyst, but I still have a party loyalty as well.
Thank you so much, Lord Hayward. For the moment, I think we're going to come back to you later. But for now, let's have a look at how the cartoonists see Rishi Sunak's D-Day debacle, because we can always learn a lot from these images that sometimes sum up the feeling of a moment. Peter Brooks for The Times depicts the Prime Minister making a speedy exit from France, watched by the soldiers in landing craft. Andy Davey has him still on the beach, but he's actually in the background behind David Cameron and world leaders doing a TV interview. Well, Ben Jennings in The Eye calls it a French exit. There's a veteran in a wheelchair blown over by the draft from the Prime Minister's helicopter. Right, none of that particularly positive for the Prime Minister. Interesting, though, to speak to Lord Hayward. What do you think? I mean, I'm interested in this, the polls that show that Reform are just behind the Conservatives. Do you think often they do well in the polls, these sorts of parties, and perhaps not so well when it actually comes to the election? Usually,
but I do think that Nigel Farage's sense of drama, his timing in launching himself into the front line has been one of the most successful political developments in this campaign. So you can't rule that out. But I mean, I think what's very important is that graph you showed of the averages. I mean, Reform's still an awful long way on average behind the Tories. It's just YouGov and perhaps one or two other pollsters who have Reform and the Tories very close.
So we'll add, there was a poll today that showed in Wales that Reform and the Welsh Tories are both at 18%. So we have actually kind of reached that big moment in Wales. But so they may overtake them. It's still something to think to flag.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And these undecided voters as well. It does seem like for a long time that's been what perhaps some Conservatives are clinging on to, is that there's this kind of underbelly of soft votes that potentially are up for grabs.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're still holding out hope on that. But I think, it's going to go down to turnout on the day, and if voters actually, in 3 weeks' time, have they had enough? Do they want to go out and actually cast a vote, or say, actually, this has been too much politics for me, let's just sit this one out?
Yeah, and it's been quite a week.
It has.
Hasn't it? I mean, do you think this week will be seen as a turning point, a decisive moment in the campaign?
I think it's quite likely to be, yes. I mean, the combination of...
We're still at the beginning, just about, I think.
I know. I mean, we've got at least three and a half weeks to go. But the combination of Nigel Farage launching himself and standing for Parliament in a seat which he can win, and Rishi Sunak making that terrible mistake. I mean, the two together, I think we'll look back on as a decisive moment.
Yeah, do you agree with that?
I totally do. I think it's something that we'll remember. Remember, in 2017 with the the social care policy. We remember that. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a marker that we won't forget.
Okay, thanks both. We will come back to you. Let's take a quick look at what else has been happening on the campaign trail today. SNP leader John Swinney has been campaigning in Livingston today, where he was watching a group of young dancers. He accused Rishi Sunak of deserting his duties as Prime Minister and predicted that voters would punish the Conservatives at the election. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey took part in a game of tennis before promising to create 3 new national parks if they win the election. The commitment to be included in their manifesto would increase the number of national parks in England to 13.
I believe this is hugely important for our environment. It will help the fight against climate change. It will help the fight against the nature crisis. We need to improve biodiversity. And whether it's local authorities or farmers or the national parks being part of this, this will help in so many ways. It helps people's health. One of the reasons I was playing tennis is because we want to get over the idea that our environment and leisure is so important for people's health.
Well, the Red Wall came to Wembley today. Wigan beat Warrington to win the biggest prize in Rugby League. But what do fans make of the election? We sent Emma Birchley out to find out.
I'm here at Wembley Stadium for Rugby League's Challenge Cup Finals Day to find out how much fans really know or care about the election.
Come on, Warrington! Come on, Warrington!
There is an election. I don't know if you know that is happening. What do you make of it so far?
Not a clue. Stay well clear of it all.
To me, they should all get together and make the country better. Both sides.
Do you think any of them could play rugby league?
I think, yeah, probably Sunak on the wing and Starmer centre. You never really get a concrete answer out of anyone, do you?
Are they strong enough to lead the country?
Absolutely not.
Mic drop.
How do you think they'd be at playing, these politicians? How do you think they'd be if they...
Rubbish.
Not a huge amount of political engagement there. Never get a concrete answer. Is that fair?
Absolutely. She's good. We should vote for her.
I think what's been really interesting, and Tamara mentioned this, is where the politicians have been, because Keir Starmer was in Aldershot today. I mean, that is somewhere that has been Conservative forever, I think, since it was first invented. And the Prime Minister was in Henley last week, which I think has also been Conservative since it was first invented. So it looks like not just a defensive strategy, but they're really kind of holding on to the castle.
Yeah, you can tell a lot from where politicians are going. I mean, I vividly remember being on David Cameron's bus in the 2015 election saying, what are we doing in a Lib Dem seat in the middle of the Pennines? I mean, honestly, we're wasting our time. And then obviously I realised what they were doing, and they did it very successfully.
And do you think they're doing as much? Today, the Prime Minister wouldn't speak to journalists. I mean, in the past, they would have been out doing press conferences all the time, wouldn't they? Do you think that's changed?
No, I'm not sure that's true, because
right?
I mean, I have a vivid memory of Boris Johnson last time dodging the press quite a lot. I mean, so much so that this myth grew up that he dived into a fridge, which isn't actually true. I mean, he was on a visit to a refrigerated plant. And he went ahead with it, but he was quite difficult to pin down, and he refused to do a lot of interviews. He wouldn't be interviewed by Andrew Neil, for example. So no, I think it's perfectly normal for politicians to want to assert a bit of control and not be interviewed all the time.
As I said in my kind of introduction, we haven't seen some of the big hitters. Do you think Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, would that be helpful for the Prime Minister or not?
I'm not sure it would be helpful. I mean, but there's obviously lots of cabinet ministers are campaigning hard for their seat. So I think actually minds have been focused that they're wanting to do that, spend time in their constituencies. You may see that change with with your debate coming up next week, and also the Manifesto launches. So, I think things might shift. You might see some of the other hitters come out and help the cause.
OK, thank you both. More to come on the Politics Hub. As Camp Binface says he'll stand in Rishi Sunak's seat, we're looking at the more eccentric candidates in UK elections.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise.
Katie Spencer, Sky News in London.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
They pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region.
I'm going to have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street.
Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight. What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake, it'll be finished, I don't know.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, one of the singular things about UK elections is the novelty candidate. Nowhere else in the world can you see a winning candidate making a victory speech next to a man dressed as a bin or a bucket or a banana. I'm not sure exactly what that says about our politics, but it's certainly very British. So after the news camp Bin Face will stand against Rishi Sunak in his seat, we thought we'd bring a flavour of some election eccentrics.
Bin Face, count Bin Face for Mayor of London.
Bonkers. Some people think I'm bonkers, but I just think I'm free. And I'm just living my life, there's nothing crazy about me. Bonk, 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 bonk. Some people think I'm bonkers, but I just think I'm free. Man, I'm just living my life, there's nothing crazy about me. Some people pay for thrills, but I get mine for free. Man, I'm just living my life, there's nothing crazy about me.
Parliament will be screaming when Lord Sutch is elected.
Right, let's bring in John and Laura again. Laura, I mean, is this just to mock politicians? Is it to make a serious point? What do you think?
It's one of the quirks of our system, isn't it? I mean, I admit where I vote, we don't have that luxury. We have all the serious candidates. But I think actually it could be a way for, people who maybe are not engaged in the democratic process, even though, they're casting a vote that's a bit strange, but to get involved. But actually the serious thing is, if those kind of votes stack up, it can make a difference, to the other parties at the end of the day. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in
I think
PMC.
sometimes they do have a serious point, like Elmo, I think, has a serious point to make about fathers. What do you think, John?
Does he? I wasn't aware of that.
I think he does. Yeah, he does actually have a political view. Right. I'm not sure about Count Bin Face.
Count Bin Face is definitely just comedy. I mean, he has a very good manifesto full of really
it's certainly very British, isn't it?
Silly policies. But it is very British. I mean, it's a bit like the way that Prime Minister's Questions became a cult hit in America on C-SPAN. I mean, if you show Americans British election declarations, they just do not know what is going on. It's like getting an American football fan to watch a rugby game.
Now, I must bring up the list, of course, for all the candidates that are standing in Richmond and Northallerton.
More than 13 of them.
More than 13 of them. And you can see that on your screen now. Right, let's bring our panel back in, because last night we saw this seven-way debate. It was a bit fiery at times. And then after there was this nice picture of Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt, I won't say embracing, but, you know, looking quite friendly. Do you think that politics can be a bit too scratchy, and actually these sorts of moments are nice to see? Here you go, there's a picture.
Yeah, it's a great picture. Yeah, I do. I think, you know, actually in the Commons there's lots of people who work across that political divide. You know, on big policy issues, I work closely with Andrea Leadsom, for example, on early years policy, and she worked with members from across the House. So I think it's important it has that place in politics. And we also actually see it across the pond. You know, we see, you know, the Bushes, they're quite close with the Clintons, and the Obamas that are also get along with the Bushes as well. So I think, you know, actually there are times when you can put party politics aside, and I think that was a really, you know, powerful and impactful moment last night. And, you know, and Penny looked great, her hair. Wow.
John, did this warm your heart? Do you think cross-party friendships are allowed?
It did come as a real surprise, because I'd been watching the debate closely because I had to write about it. And they were very scratchy with each other, the two of them. You know, Angela Rayner was saying, "Don't you point at me," and that kind of thing. But as soon as the debate was over, they were warm, and they were all smiles, and Angela Rayner was actually touching Penny Mordaunt's arm. I mean, I think that is how politics ought to be, actually. And I think there's far too much people using the L word, calling each other liars. They shouldn't do that. I mean, I think a bit of mutual respect is good.
Bit of mutual respect, and there's certainly mutual respect here from our panel. Thank you so much for giving up your Saturday night. We will be with you again tomorrow. It will be me all weekend. Stay with us for all the top stories. 25 days, 11 hours till the general election.